The Gateway to Hell. The winter night of 1977 in Moscow painted a monotonous and bleak picture. The howling wind carried tiny snowflakes piercing the skin like thousands of pinpricks. The entire city was submerged in an endless white expanse with streetlights casting a faint yellowish glow, too weak to dispel the biting cold and pervasive loneliness. The suburban road leading out of the city center, already desolate, grew even more barren in the midst of the blizzard. A heavy black ZIL car slowly rolled into an old isolated gas station by the roadside. The sound of tires crunching on the thick dry snow echoed like a sigh in the silent space. Robert Fulton, the CIA station chief in Moscow, stepped out of the car. His woolen hat was pulled low over his forehead, the collar of his thick coat turned up, yet he still felt the bone-chilling cold. His white breath dissolved into the air like cigarette smoke. Fulton felt nothing unusual. He was just a spy doing his job refueling the diplomatic car before returning to the embassy. Standing by the pump, Fulton's eyes scanned his surroundings out of professional instinct. Nothing seemed out of place. There was only a man lingering in a nearby shack where small items were typically sold. The man was bundled up in a heavy coat, his face barely visible. Fulton paid him no mind. He could just be the station owner hiding from the cold. But then something unexpected happened. The man stepped out. He wasn't a strapping young man or an ordinary worker, but a middle-aged Russian around 50 years old. His frame was gaunt, his back slightly hunched, yet his steps were resolute. His face was weathered, etched with wrinkles of life and worry, but deep in his eyes burned a fire of determination. Instead of heading toward the pump, he walked straight toward Fulton. Fulton tensed immediately. Every sense was on high alert. He tightened his grip in his coat pocket, ready for any situation. The man stopped about 3 meters away. His voice was low, heavy, and hoarse from the cold. "Are you American?" The simple question detonated like a bomb in the quiet space. Fulton didn't respond. He stood still, staring into Tolkachev's eyes, trying to read the man. It could be a trap. It could be the KGB testing him. A wrong word, a misplaced gesture could lead to catastrophic consequences. Tolkachev understood the silence. His face showed clear disappointment, but then a spark flashed in his eyes. He bent down, pretending to tie his snow-covered shoelaces. Fulton remained still watching. With a swift, lightning-fast motion, Tolkachev's right hand slipped a small piece of paper onto the passenger seat of the ZIL. Then he stood up. Without another word, he turned and melted into the darkness, walking away with surprising speed. Fulton stood motionless, watching Tolkachev's figure vanish. His mind raced with questions and theories. A piece of paper, why? An offer to collaborate, a trap? Or was this a Russian genuinely wanting to work with the CIA professional? Pride urged caution, but curiosity drove him forward. He quickly finished refueling, got back in the car and drove off. On the way back to the embassy, Fulton's eyes kept darting to the paper on the passenger seat. It was just a small, carefully folded white sheet, unmarked by any symbols or writing. He suppressed his curiosity, knowing he couldn't read it anywhere but the office. Everything could be watched. At the embassy, he went straight to his office. The desk lamp's light illuminated his tense face. He carefully unfolded the paper. Written in Russian was a simple but weighty offer: "I want to provide intelligence on Soviet military technology." Below was a rough sketch of the gas station with a note. "Read it. You won't regret it." Fulton held the paper and moved to a small, secure room. He placed it on a photocopier, made a copy, then carefully burned the original, reducing it to ashes. A voice echoed in his mind, "If this is a trap, It's a very sophisticated one. But if it's not, this will be a big story. And so, on a freezing winter night, at a desolate gas station, a spy took a risk opening a door, later called the Gateway to Hell. And that man, Adolf Tolkachev, began his tragic yet heroic journey. One suspicion and fear. The CIA office at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow was no place for relaxation. It was a maze of old maps, thick files, and an atmosphere perpetually taut as a bowstring. That night when Robert Fulton returned, the tension skyrocketed. He placed the paper on the meeting table, and all eyes turned to it. "He says he wants to provide intelligence on military radar," Fulton said, his voice dry. Silence enveloped the room. Everyone understood the implications. In the shadowy world of espionage, nothing came free. Especially in Moscow, where the KGB controlled every corner, every move, every thought. A voluntary offer like this could only mean one of two things: a chance to shift the balance of the Cold War, or a perfect trap, a deadly lure. "It's definitely a KGB trap," Bill said firmly. "They're testing us. They want to see how reckless we'll be." His report could be bait. David added a juicy morsel to make us bite, only to be caught. Fulton didn't argue. He understood their caution. Over years of operations, he had seen too many spies' lives destroyed by a single wrong decision. The KGB could have found a disgruntled man pretending to offer cooperation, using him as a puppet to lure the CIA. "What do we do?" another agent asked. "Ignore it," David replied instantly. "The risk is too great. We can't trade our network for an unverified offer." His words seemed to close the matter, but then something unexpected happened. A young agent entered, holding a similar piece of paper, wrapped in plastic. "Mr. Fulton," he said, voice trembling. I found it under your car's wiper a few nights ago." It was from Tolkachev. He had returned. The room exchanged glances, suspicion lingering, but now tinged with astonishment. This man wouldn't give up. He wasn't just bold, he was persistent. Despite no response, he risked approaching the diplomatic car again, under the KGB's tight surveillance. Flashback. The dim streetlight illuminated Tolkachev's anxious yet resolute face. He moved lightly through the snow toward Fulton's car. He didn't look around as if knowing it would draw attention. With a swift motion, he placed the paper under the wiper and walked away. Snowflakes fell onto his collar, melting. Cold, but his heart burned. He had bet everything. Present. Now there were two pieces of paper. This was no longer just a theory. It was an invitation, a challenge. A heated debate erupted in the office. Suspicion and fear continued. "He's persistent," Fulton said, locking eyes with David. "No one's ever been this reckless. He's not an ordinary Russian." "It could be their plan," David countered stubbornly. "The more persistent, the easier it is to make us believe." The CIA's hesitation was well-founded. Their history in Moscow was riddled with painful tales of volunteer spies who turned out to be KGB pawns. One mistake could expose their entire network. Yet Tolkachev's case was different. He didn't ask for money. He only wanted to provide information. He seemed indifferent to material gain, driven by something greater. The debate stretched for hours. Finally, a calm, authoritative man entered the room. Gardner Hathaway, the new station chief from Washington. Hathaway listened to the story without interrupting. He studied the paper, the tense faces of the agents. At last he said, "This could be a once-in-a-generation opportunity. We can't miss it." Hathaway's decisiveness ended the debate. He ordered proceed with contact. Verify every detail. Find out who this man is. Learn his motives. I want to know everything." His words sparked a faint hope in Moscow's darkness. A dangerous game had begun. Tolkachev, an ordinary man, had staked his life, and the CIA, the world's most powerful intelligence agency, chose to take the risk, entering a gamble where victory meant priceless intelligence and defeat would cost blood and tears. The CIA's hesitation and Tolkachev's persistence highlighted the peril of the espionage world where every word and action could be the end. Tolkachev had planted a secret seed, and now the CIA had to nurture it to see if it would blossom or wither in suspicion and fear. The door to collaboration had opened, but it was also a door to a perilous abyss. And the story of the billion-dollar spy had only just begun. Senin. The door opens, the call of fate. The CIA office returned to a state of tense hope. The decision was made. They would take the risk. Station Chief Gardner Hathaway assigned John Gilshire, a young agent, to make contact. Gilshire, the youngest in the team, was trusted for his meticulousness and sharp observation. This was his chance, but also a burden. Failure could ruin not only his career, but the CIA's entire Moscow network. While Gilshire prepared Tolkachev, the enigmatic Russian didn't sit idle. He knew the CIA's patience was limited. He needed a bolder move, an unmistakable signal. One spring afternoon in 1978, Moscow's faint sunlight bathed the bustling streets. Tolkachev appeared at a crowded bus stop where hundreds waited. He carried no paper this time. Instead, he held a piece of wood and a can of paint. Posing as a worker fixing a sign, he carefully scrawled a phone number and name on the wood as if it were a casual note. Hathaway and his wife, Natasha. Hathaway were in a car nearby. They were the perfect pair for this task. Natasha, a diplomat's wife, had a photographic memory and an unassuming demeanor. As their car passed the bus stop, Natasha glanced over. In seconds, she memorized the number perfectly. Showing no emotion, she kept driving. Everything went smoothly, unnoticed. At the CIA office, Gilshire was given the number. His heart pounded. This was the moment of truth. Hathaway devised a cautious plan. Gilshire would call from a public phone booth. If a woman answered, it would be Tolkachev's wife. Gilshire would say, "Sorry, I dialed the wrong number," and hang up. If a man answered, he'd hang up immediately. It was a simple but critical code. The next afternoon, Gilshire stood in a public phone booth in the city center, surrounded by the noise of traffic and crowds. His hands trembled as he dialed. The phone rang slowly, like a countdown. Ring, ring, ring. After the fourth ring, a woman's voice answered. "Hello." It was warm, slightly tired, but unsuspecting. A jolt ran down Gilshire's spine. It was Tolkachev's wife. He took a deep breath, keeping his voice as steady as possible. "Sorry," he said dryly. I dialed the wrong number." "Oh, no problem," the voice replied gently. "Call back if you need anything." Gilshire hung up. He stood in the booth, exhaling in relief. Sweat drenched his palms. He had completed the task. The first door had opened. But the game didn't stop there. Gilshire and Tolkachev began their tense dates. They walked together, but never spoke, communicating through gestures and secret signals. Once Tolkachev passed Gilshire in a park, pretending to trip and dropping a plastic bag containing a small film roll. Gilshire swiftly picked it up and left. Another time, Tolkachev stood on a street corner holding a newspaper. As Gilshire passed, he gave a slight nod, signaling new information. Each meeting was a mental duel. Every glance, every gesture could be decoded by the KGB. They couldn't afford any risk. Both knew they were walking a tightrope where a single misstep could end everything. Gilshire brought the film rolls to the office where they were handled with care. When technicians viewed the photos, they were stunned. The images showed designs of top-secret radar systems, missile deployment maps, and aviation electronics information the U.S. had never accessed. Tolkachev's intelligence was so precise and detailed that CIA experts declared him a goldmine. They believed no KGB-controlled asset could provide such information. Initial suspicions faded, replaced by admiration. Tolkachev wasn't a puppet. He was risking his life for a reason, and the CIA bet on him. It was a high-stakes gamble. Tolkachev had opened a door to the Soviet Union secrets, and the CIA stepped through. The fateful call ushered in a new era of espionage, where an ordinary man became a legendary spy, ready to sacrifice his life to change the world. It all began with a wrong number. Saji, A Life in the Shadows. After the fateful call, Adolf Tolkachev officially entered the clandestine world of espionage. His once quiet, unremarkable life now plunged into darkness. By day, he was a diligent engineer at the Phasotron Scientific Research and Production Institute, one of the Soviet Union's most secretive military research centers. By night, he became a shadow, a silent ghost in his own apartment and on Moscow's streets. His operations were systematic and perilous. His intelligence was invaluable, and the CIA equipped him with top tools, a tiny spy camera concealed to take hundreds of photos without noticeable sound, and special film for low-light conditions. Tolkachev exploited brief breaks at work, slipping into the bathroom and locking the door. It was his safest, yet most dangerous refuge. The steady drip of an old faucet, the whistle of wind through a window, and his pounding heartbeat filled the silence. Every sense was on high alert. He spread blueprints and technical documents on the floor. The dim light of a faulty bulb illuminated his sweating face. His trembling hands held the camera, but his eyes never blinked. He photographed page after page, the faint click-click of the camera like a ticking clock counting down his time. He knew each moment there could be his last. At home, he continued his work. In his small, cozy family apartment, he turned his study into a secret lab. After his wife and son were asleep, he carefully laid out documents on the table using a 35mm camera. He worked in darkness with only a small flashlight for light, guarding against prying eyes outside the window. Each day he lived in two worlds, one as a husband-father and ordinary engineer, the other as a solitary man surrounded by fears and secrets that could cost him his life. He meticulously stored the film rolls later, exchanging them with CIA agent John Gilshire through dead drops. A common drop was a park where Tolkachev, posing as a stroller, would bend down to tie his shoe, leaving a small bag with a film roll under a bench. Later, Gilshire, also posing as a stroller, would pick it up and leave as if nothing happened. These exchanges were fraught with tension. Every glance, every gesture had to be natural to avoid suspicion. He knew the KGB could be watching anytime, anywhere. Each successful drop brought relief, but also greater fear. What drove him? Money, power? No. His motivation stemmed from a deep, unhealed wound. His wife, Natasha, once told their son about their family's tragic past. "Your grandfather," she said, "was executed just for opposing the regime. I had to hide that for years." That story was the fire that consumed Tolkachev. He couldn't forgive a regime that took his loved ones' lives and shattered a family. Each photo he took, each film he passed, wasn't just for the CIA. It was revenge. He was reclaiming what was lost, fighting for a world where people like his grandfather wouldn't die unjustly. The CIA didn't just receive intelligence, they gained a spy with the strongest motive. They understood Tolkachev wasn't greedy, but driven by hatred and a thirst for justice. They dubbed him the billion-dollar spy, not for what he took, but for what he gave. His information on Soviet radar missiles and aviation electronics saved the US billions in military research and development. Tolkachev's life was a relentless chain of anxiety and tension. Yet he wasn't alone. He knew people on the other side trusted and relied on him. That trust fueled his dangerous journey. Each night as Moscow slept, Tolkachev became a solitary man in a silent war, fighting an entire regime alone. And he knew that one day this war would end, an end he couldn't predict. Naritrin. The News Titans. Time passed and things changed. From 1983, the first signs of trouble emerged. The KGB's invisible grip became palpable. Adolf Tolkachev's tension wasn't just from fear, but from concrete signs. Meeting with John Gilsher grew harder. Tolkachev began missing appointments, unprecedented for him. He'd arrive at a drop weight an hour in vain and leave with disappointment and a bad feeling. One afternoon returning home, he noticed an old black Lada parked 2 buildings away. It was there the next day and the day after. He realized he was being watched not randomly, but systematically. Fear pierced his every cell. The greatest pressure came from his workplace. A security investigation at Fazatron scrutinized every employee and document. As a senior engineer, Tolkachev was a prime suspect. Every gesture and word was examined. He halted all activities, burned remaining documents, and tried to blend into normalcy, becoming as invisible as possible. Those were hellish months. The fear of discovery and betrayal loomed larger than ever. He knew his life was measured in days. Desperate, in a rare contact, he sent the CIA an urgent request. Is seen. An emergency drop at a public restroom. Tolkachev entered pale-faced. He wrote a note, placed it in an old toothpaste box, and left it in a cabinet. When Gilsher found it, he understood. The note pleaded, "I need a poison pill, and I need an emergency escape plan. I feel they're very close." The CIA responded swiftly. In another dead drop, they left a small bag with a cyanide pill encased in plastic and a tiny Morse code transmitter for emergency signals. The poison pill, a final escape, was a crushing psychological burden. Tolkachev stored it in an old tin box. Each glance at it conjured images of a tragic end. But it was his only way to avoid KGB torture and protect his allies. In rare secret talks with the CIA, Tolkachev requested an escape plan to get his wife and son out of the Soviet Union. Seen Tolkachev's apartment. "You have to leave, Natasha Tolkachev," said, voice trembling. "Oleg, too. They're so close." "No," Natasha replied, eyes welling. "We can't leave you. You're our husband, our father. We can't live without you." Their son, Oleg, young, but sensing the family's tension, watched his parents confused by their argument. His wife and son's refusal to leave struck Tolkachev's heart. He wanted them safe, but they wouldn't abandon him. He knew if caught, they'd face a grim fate. Fear for them overpowered his fear for himself. Despite the dangers, Tolkachev kept supplying information. His hatred for the regime outburned his fear. He knew each day was a dance with death, but he didn't stop. One night, Tolkachev stood at his apartment window. Snow fell outside, but he no longer felt the cold. He gazed at the street where the Lada remained. He knew it was the price of courage. He had chosen this path and couldn't turn back. The psychological strain eroded him. He grew gaunt, his eyes weary and panicked. Yet he remained a silent hero, a man who chose to stand against an empire, knowing the end would likely be tragic. Tolkachev prepared for his final day. The poison pill lay silent in its tin, a promise of a quick, painless death. He had done all he could. Now he waited for a CIA signal or the KGB's knock. His once secret life had become a gamble with fate. Me, scientific verdict in the winter night. It was June 1985. Summer had come to Moscow, but a heavy, indescribable gloom lingered. After months of living in extreme anxiety, Adolf Tolkachev was accustomed to being watched. The black Lada still parked on a street corner, and eyes peered from behind curtains. He lived like a shadow each day, a mental duel with death. But he didn't know his fate had been sealed long ago, not by the KGB, but by a traitor within the CIA. That traitor was Aldrich Ames, a CIA agent who betrayed hundreds of colleagues and sources to the Soviets. Ames had given Tolkachev's name to the KGB, trading a silent hero's life for money and power. One day, the KGB received classified information. The CIA planned an exchange at a secret Moscow location. The KGB saw a golden opportunity to capture not just Tolkachev, but also an American agent. The KGB orchestrated a perfect trap. They had cracked one of Tolkachev's signals. An open apartment window meant a meeting. Unbeknownst to Tolkachev, KGB agents broke into his apartment and opened the window, a deadly invitation. Scene: a narrow, desolate Moscow alley. Paul Stambaugh, a young agent, waited nervously. He didn't know this was his first and last mission. He looked up at Tolkachev's apartment. The window was open. The signal was confirmed. He stepped into the alley where Tolkachev was to leave documents. Suddenly, a black van screeched to a halt, blocking the road. Its doors flew open and masked men in civilian clothes rushed out, moving like predators. Stambaugh, caught off guard, was knocked down. He struggled, shouting, "I'm a CIA agent. You have no right." But no one cared. A brutal punch knocked him out and he was dragged into the van. The entire operation took less than a minute. It was a diversion. While the CIA worried about Stambaugh, another capture unfolded. Tolkachev and his wife Natasha were driving home, unaware of the impending tragedy. Their car was stopped by a police vehicle. The officer demanded Tolkachev's papers. Trembling, he complied, his heart pounding. Another van, identical to the one that took Stambaugh, pulled up behind, blocking view. Men in civilian clothes stepped out. In a flash, they opened Tolkachev's car door. Before he could react, a man pressed a chloroform-soaked rag over his mouth and nose. Tolkachev thrashed desperately, but it was futile. He sank into darkness. Natasha beside him screamed, but she was restrained. The KGB agents swiftly pulled Tolkachev from the car and threw him into the van. The door slammed shut with a cold, final sound. Natasha's screams were swallowed by the night. Tolkachev awoke, his head throbbing. The surroundings were dark and damp. He knew where he was: Lefortovo Prison, the holding place for traitors. He endured brutal torture for days. Yet Tolkachev remained steadfast, refusing to reveal anything about the CIA or his contacts. He had accepted death and didn't want anyone to die with him. His life was a long chain of anxiety, but facing death, he was strangely calm. He had done everything to avenge his father-in-law, and now he accepted his fate. The traitors had sold him out, but they couldn't strip his honor. Tolkachev had won. The KGB's trap succeeded. They captured an American agent and one of the CIA's most valuable sources. The game was over, but Tolkachev's story wasn't. His death was merely a new chapter in his legacy. Miller. The end and the immortal legacy. After months of brutal torture at Lefortovo Prison, Adolf Tolkachev knew his fate was sealed. His life from an ordinary engineer to an extraordinary spy would end tragically. A secret trial with no lawyer or witnesses was held. The final verdict: execution for treason. Tolkachev didn't resist. He had accepted death long ago. On the night of October 24, 1986, in a dark, cold corridor of Lefortovo, the sentence was carried out. A gunshot rang out, a single sound that ended a life of legend. Tolkachev was gone. He had done all he could and kept his promise never betray anyone. But the story didn't end there. Natasha, his wife, was sentenced to hard labor. She was sent to a Siberian labor camp where cold and hardship wore her down daily. Despite immense suffering, Natasha held her gaze firm. She knew her husband was a hero who sacrificed for a noble cause. She lived each day, each hour with that belief. Though later pardoned and returned home, she was too frail. In 1991, Natasha died of cancer, carrying all her husband's pain and secrets. Tolkachev's son, Oleg, grew up unaware of his father's deeds. To him, his father was just an engineer who vanished from his life. Oleg became an architect living quietly. He didn't know that millions worldwide benefited daily from his father's sacrifice. In Washington, after Tolkachev's death, the CIA faced a harsh reality. Their most valuable source was lost. A rigorous internal investigation uncovered the traitor Aldrich Ames. The CIA painfully realized Tolkachev's sacrifice was in vain, betrayed by their own. Yet Tolkachev's legacy endured. Though gone, his intelligence was used by the CIA until 1990. His classified documents on Soviet radar missiles and aviation electronics gave the U.S. an unmatched strategic edge in the Cold War. Thanks to his information, the U.S. saved billions in military research and development, understanding Soviet weaknesses to build effective countermeasures. In 1990, CIA Director William Webster held a special meeting to honor Tolkachev. He called him the billion-dollar spy, a title no other agent had earned. Webster said Tolkachev single-handedly altered the Cold War's course with mere papers and extraordinary courage. Tolkachev's story is a tragedy of bravery, sacrifice, and betrayal. He gave his life for an ideal, to avenge his wife's family, to bring justice. Though he departed silently, his legacy lives on a tale of a lone man who stood against an empire and, despite defeat, triumphed in the hearts of those who knew him. Tolkachev's life reminds us that in the shadowy world of espionage, no victory comes easily. Sometimes the greatest heroes are those the world never knows. His story reveals the brutal truth of the spy world. If you're captivated by such secret tales, hit the subscribe button now to catch more. And don't forget to comment below, sharing your thoughts on this silent hero.